Hi, my name's Jenny List. I write a lot about other people's projects, but I rarely write about my own. So here we are again for another look at what's on Jenny's bench. The last two videos I've shown you, I've been talking about my Super 8 digital cartridge, a cartridge for Super 8 movie cameras from the 1970s, which allows them to record digital video. Today, I'm going to continue on the same theme, but go a little off on a tangent. I'm going to do a teardown on this, my Minolta XL250 test camera. I hope you enjoy it. It's certainly a lot of fun to take one of these things apart and see what makes them tick. I've introduced you to my digital Super 8 cartridge with a Raspberry Pi in it, but perhaps it's time to do something to explain why I'm so fascinated with these cameras. Probably the best way to do that is to take one to pieces, do a teardown, because they're the ultimate piece of 1970s high tech, but they're also a very electromechanical, very analog device. There's almost nothing digital in these. Most of them are completely mechanical, and if they have electronics, it's usually very, very simple analog electronics, just the odd sort of transistor or two or something like that. So I'm going to take my test camera. It's a Minolta XL250, and this one has obviously been pretty well used. It's quite battered. It came into my possession. I bought it at a second-hand shop in the Netherlands when I was going around with a bunch of my Dutch hackerspace friends, and it must have cost me about €3 or something. If I open it up, as you can see, this is the one where I've cut away the piece in the side so that you can get at the connections for a Raspberry Pi Zero. If you look inside, when I got it, it had some very crusty old 1980s or 1970s batteries in it that were very they'd leaked everywhere, so I had to clean it out. I had to replace one of the battery terminals, which you'll see in a bit. It's kind of interesting. It was originally supplied by a company called Outenbroek Film in Rotterdam, and since this is the early 1970s, I think that's the price, 690 guilders, and I worked it out, and I think it's about £125 in early 1970s British money, but that works out at over £1,000 nowadays. This was actually a very expensive piece of kit. I may have got my maths wrong, and it may be a bit less, but even so, this was not a cheap piece of kit. I'm very indebted to Minolta because they've made a camera that is extremely easy to take apart. Some of these cameras are very, very intricate, and you have to really know what you're doing, and you can mess it up and you take it apart and springs go everywhere. But this one is beautifully designed. I'm very impressed with the engineers at Minolta for doing that. So without further ado, let's start taking it apart. Taking this side off is very easy, just 3 screws. So if I just, there we go, first screw, second screw, the other screw is on top. There we go, number 3. And it just comes off gently. Or supposedly does. There we go. It just lifts off. And the Minolta logo piece on the front comes off too. And immediately you can see some of the workings of the camera. Obviously there's a big lens unit on the front. It's a telephoto lens, so it's got the zoom ring and the focus ring. If we can get the camera in to see the side of it. First of all, there's the lens. Then in here is an aperture. It's like a triangular opening in a piece of very thin metal that's mounted on a moving coil meter mechanism. And so the light comes in, passes through an aperture, and then through another set of lenses, and under here is the shutter. This printed circuit board I think carries some of the light meter circuitry, as well as I think these traces supply the motor, which is down here. The motor drives everything. There is an adjustment here, which is a manual aperture setting or an auto aperture setting. As I move this, you can see the aperture, well, you can just about see the aperture moving in there in between the lens and the rear half of the lens. At the very top, it was completely driven by the meter. I think all this does is effectively adjust the end stop on the meter. But that's pretty much most of what you can see from this side. In there is the negative spring that I had to replace. The original had completely corroded away from the battery stuff leaking out. You can see there's a little bit of corrosion on this metalwork, which, to be honest, you can always clean up as much as you can, but sometimes you have to take the whole thing to pieces, and I figured this didn't actually make much difference to the working of the camera, so I left it. So anyway, the back of the camera. Here there are two screws on this side. There's one in here, which I'll just take out. I think these two go into brass bushes, but the other one on the other side goes into the plastic. So if I just, there we go, there we go. And there it is, it's on this side, there we go. Now before I go any further, I'm going to turn the camera on, because it turns a switch underneath on the printed circuit board, and if I turn that I can operate the camera while it's in pieces, so it's easy to see how it works. So hang on, if I now, having undone the three screws, this side just, hang on, I have to undo the film door, there we go, the side just comes off. I will just put this on one side, there we go. And here we have the structure of the camera. If I press the shutter, you can see it works. And on this side you can see the film advance working. And on this side, if we look carefully at it, we have more printed circuit boards. This is just basically an on-off switch. And I think this was probably the same board used on a more advanced version of the same camera with more features, so these aren't populated. That I'm not certain. I think that may be the rest of the light meter circuitry. Are there any, possibly there might be a transistor hiding on the other side of that. I haven't had this board off to look, because you'd have to unsolder some of the wires. Meanwhile, you've got, in behind there is the motor, there's a gearbox here, and there's actually a flexible drive there, goes to the film advance wheel there, and at the front here we have a little gearbox on the front which engages with the telephoto ring on the lens. There is a gear on the side of the ring there, and if I go back to the case, in the case here are my tele and wide buttons, and if I press them, you see there is a lever, a lever mechanism which goes down to operate, engage with the gearbox down here. Effectively, it's selecting forward and reverse on a gearbox. There's like a rocker with two little brass gears, one going in one direction and the other going in the other direction. And if I move that there, that engages that direction, or that engages that direction. And when the shutter is pressed, it will turn the telephoto ring based on the buttons at the top. Otherwise, here we've got the viewfinder. There's the bit you stick your eye at, set of lenses, another set of lenses there to sort of do the focusing and stuff. Here is a mirror, and then there's a light guide goes down from the mirror, and there's a prism in the middle of the light path through the camera. It's hidden away in there, you can't really see it, but it's there. The whole point is this is a reflex design like an SLR still camera, so what you're looking at through the viewfinder doesn't come out here, it comes out through the lens. There's also has what's called through the lens light metering. You see TTL on some of these, and of course as an electronic engineer you see TTL and you think of transistor logic, but in this case it's through the lens light metering. And the way that works is under here is a photocell, I'll show you in a minute, and a little prism. So without further ado, let's have a look at the shutter. Let's take it apart a little further. For that we need to take off this back panel, and there's some tiny screws which I'm dead scared I'm going to have roll off into the darkness and I'll never find them again. So this one lifts up gently like that. Whoops, press the shutter button, and then to take this plate that goes in front of the film cartridge off, you undo 3 screws, which I'll just have to, if you'll bear with me a second, I'll just have to undo. Here's number 1, put you there. Number 2. And number 3 is a little annoying with this screwdriver. I wish I had a much longer, thinner precision screwdriver, but you can't win them all. My Hackerspace has an iFixit kit that's got an extender, and I kind of wish that I had one of those. Maybe I should buy myself an iFixit kit sometime. Get it in there. There we go. Now, this piece is worth looking at first. I'll just remove the screw so I don't lose it. There we go. Right, on here, this engages with the front of the film cartridge. The film goes through this place here, and there is the window through which it's exposed. And on the back is this sliding piece, which slides backwards and forwards like so. And there is a little claw here, which you may be able to see. I don't know how good the camera is or how good the lighting is while I'm filming it. There's a little claw here which engages with each sprocket hole and pulls the film forward 1 frame. Super 8 film has 1 row of sprockets up the side because that's all it needs. That's the thing that engages with it. And if you look in here, you see this round thing here. Let's just carefully lift it out, is the shutter. Now, it's a circle, or it's rather a section of a circle. Sometimes these are sectional, a complete circle with a hole in it. This one is a circle with an arc cut out of it. And it rotates round, and the exposure time is effectively the time that the circle isn't in the way of the lens. So the lens is behind this, and the film is in front of it, where my finger is now. The light comes from here, and when the shutter is in that position, the light can't go through it, but as it rotates round, it comes through it and can expose the film this side. That's basically the function of a movie camera shutter. In this case, on that side, it has a cam. That's a raised piece there, is a cam, and that locates with this part of this pressing here, and engages the film advance, the little claw, and it slides backwards and forwards like this. So that's how that works. On the other side of the shutter, you see it's mirrored, and what that is, that as it rotates round, when the shutter is closed, and this is in the way of the light path, it reflects some of the light upwards at an angle. So it's a 45-degree angle, and the light comes in and it's bounced upwards. Now, the reason it's bounced upwards, if you look at the I don't know if this can be seen on there. I'm hoping this can be seen. If you look at the camera itself, there are the gears that drive the shutter. That brass gear is the thing that actually engages with the shutter. There's the lens where the light comes in, but above the lens here is a light guide and a prism with a mirror. So this mirror on the shutter bounces the light up into that prism, which is then reflected this way, and this silver can here is a photocell, and the photocell is in the circuitry for the moving coil meter with the aperture, and that's how the auto aperture works. Now what I'm going to try and do is just, are we still wired up? I think it's going to go ping if I do this. Yeah, that still works. Okay. If I try to put the shutter in and run it up with the cover off like this so that we can see it in operation. There we go, that's it. Right, now, if I hold my finger on it like so, so it doesn't fly off, you should be able to see it spin round as I press the button, and you can see the mode of its operation. So that, in a nutshell, is how a Super 8 movie camera works. I could probably take it to pieces further, but you wouldn't see any more of the functions, you'd just see the individual components. There's, to a certain extent, miracles of manufacture, because they are very, very complex devices. Even for their day, they were quite complex. And yet they've been miniaturized for mass production with some quite clever tricks, like the flexible drive for this here. I mean, the whole camera is about this thick at this point. You have a problem, how do you drive this? In some cameras, UMIG cameras, they have two little fingers that do this by going backwards and forwards like that on either side of the gear, which looks crazy, but it works. And for me, they're not worth a lot these days. I mean, if you look on eBay or whichever, you will see these, you'll see 8mm cameras for silly amounts of money. They're usually the more fancy ones, the ones with better lenses or the ones with interchangeable lenses. They're very rarely the cheap snapshot ones, and they're almost never the ones with 40-year-old batteries welded into the battery case and leaked everywhere. But if you look on eBay, you'll find a lot of cameras going for silly money. People seem to think these are worth enormous amounts of money. The fact is, they're not. There are millions of these about. Most older people probably have one somewhere in a drawer somewhere that they had in the 70s. That's basically how I'm getting hold of them. I'm finding them in second-hand shops. People are giving them to me, and I'm getting somebody's dad's old camera because he's turning it out or whatever. So if you're interested in cameras at the bottom end, this shouldn't cost you much. If somebody is trying to ask you silly money for a very battered old Minolta like this one with a set of 1980s batteries welded into the corroding battery compartment, tell them to go away, because it simply isn't worth it. But from my point of view, it's a relatively cheap and kind of fun bit of mechanism to play with, and I've got into them partly for the photography and partly because I did quite a few things. Some of them are quite stressful, and playing with old cameras and doing fun things with them is a great way to de-stress. Anyway, that is a Minolta XL250 torn down. Now you know how one works. I don't have a sponsor for my videos, but as before, I'd like to take this moment to talk about something else I'm involved with away from my career writing about tech. I am a board member of a small non-profit called Trans Rescue. We get trans people like me out of dodgy and dangerous places around the world. I'd like you to go to our website, read our blog and see what we're up to, and if you can, help us in our work. Thanks very much, and thank you for watching this video.